India's sovereignty and independence are not just political concepts, they are the very essence of its identity as a nation. When Dr. S. Jaishankar speaks of sovereignty, he invokes centuries of struggle, resilience, and determination that have defined India's path from colonial subjugation under British rule to the trials of partition and the decades of nation building. India has always been aware that true freedom does not end with the lowering of a colonial flag. It begins with the assertion of one's own choices in the global arena. This is why India's reply to Donald Trump or any Western leader who seeks to question its independence must be firm, principled, and unapologetic. Sovereignty is not something India negotiates. It is something India embodies. The foundation of sovereignty lies in the ability to make decisions that reflect the will of one's people rather than the preferences of external actors. In this sense, India has always been wary of becoming a pawn in global geopolitics. During the Cold War, when the world was divided between two superpowers, India resisted immense pressure to align itself exclusively with either the United States or the Soviet Union. Instead, India chose the non-aligned movement, a bold declaration that its policies would be guided not by the interests of others but by its own sense of justice, balance, and independence. That choice was not without criticism. Many in the West saw it as ambiguity or indecisiveness, but history has vindicated India's approach. Non-alignment allowed India to maintain autonomy, to engage with both blocs, and to preserve its decision-making authority at a time when many newly independent nations were being pulled into the orbit of stronger powers. Today, sovereignty manifests in different ways. In matters of foreign policy, it means that India decides its own alignments based on national interests. Whether it is the question of buying energy resources from Russia, building strategic ties with the United States, or strengthening regional partnerships in Asia, India's choices are not dictated by pressure but by pragmatism. When the West has attempted to frame India's decisions as problematic or contradictory, Jaishankar has consistently reminded them that nations act in pursuit of their interests, no less, no more. If others have the right to make choices that serve their people, then so does India. Sovereignty cannot be selective, and independence cannot be conditional. Sovereignty also extends to economic policy. India, once dismissed as a developing nation dependent on aid, has become one of the world's fastest-growing major economies. This transformation was not achieved by blindly following Western prescriptions, but by charting a unique path of reforms, self-reliance, and innovation. Programs such as Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat are not just slogans, they represent a larger philosophy that India will no longer depend on others for its future. It will manufacture, innovate, and lead on its own terms. Sovereignty in this sense is economic as much as political. It is the power to build industries, generate resources, and fuel growth without being perpetually indebted to or dependent on external benefactors. Equally important is cultural and civilizational sovereignty. India's strength lies not only in its economy or military, but also in its ability to preserve and project its civilizational values. Western nations often speak of democracy, liberty, and human rights as if they invented these ideals. Yet India has lived by the spirit of pluralism and tolerance for thousands of years. In India, dozens of religions, hundreds of languages, and thousands of traditions coexist, not by imposition but by choice. This cultural independence makes India resistant to any attempt to impose foreign models of governance or morality. When external leaders question India's democratic credentials or seek to lecture it on rights, they fail to understand that India's fabric is woven with inclusivity far deeper than any imported doctrine. Sovereignty means that India does not need validation from others to prove what it has lived for centuries. Another layer of sovereignty is strategic autonomy. This is where Jaishankar's words become particularly sharp. India is building its defense capabilities not as a token of alliance, but as a pillar of self-protection. The modernization of its armed forces, its nuclear deterrent, and its investments in indigenous defense manufacturing all reflect the same principle. India will defend itself by itself. It welcomes partnerships, but it rejects dependency. This is why India's procurement of weapons is diversified, ranging from American fighter jets to Russian missile systems to indigenous projects like the Tejas aircraft. This balanced approach ensures that India never falls under the control of any one supplier or bloc. Sovereignty in defense is non-negotiable because national security is the most sacred element of independence. When Jaishankar replies to Western criticism, his tone is neither aggressive nor submissive. It is calm, precise, and chilling in its clarity. He often reminds his interlocutors that India is not in the business of pleasing others at the cost of its own interests. If asked why India continues to engage with countries under Western sanctions, he points out that Europe itself buys far more from the same sources. If questioned about democracy, he highlights the millions of Indians who exercise their right to vote freely in elections, larger than the populations of entire continents. Sovereignty means India owes no explanation beyond the truth. And the truth is that India will do what it must to serve its people, not to conform to Western expectations. Sovereignty also implies resilience against external interference. Modern geopolitics is not only about territorial disputes or military might, but also about information, narratives, and influence. Attempts to malign India's image on the world stage, whether through selective reporting or biased assessments, are met with firm rebuttals. India no longer allows others to define its story. It projects its own voice, whether through platforms like the G20 presidency, global summits, or multilateral organizations. Sovereignty here means owning the narrative, not surrendering it. One cannot ignore the psychological dimension of sovereignty. For too long, developing nations were made to feel inferior. Constantly measured against Western benchmarks, India's rise challenges this very mindset. When Jaishankar emphasizes sovereignty, he also emphasizes dignity. The dignity of a nation that will not accept a patron-client relationship. This dignified independence is what unsettles many in the West. They are used to giving instructions. India is used to listening politely and then doing what it believes is right. This quiet defiance, rooted in confidence, is the truest expression of sovereignty. At its core, sovereignty and independence mean that India belongs to Indians. The choices made in Delhi are not dictated from Washington, Moscow, or Beijing. The policies enacted are for the 1.4 billion citizens who live, work, and dream within its borders. This principle is what gives India its strength, and it is why no foreign leader, no matter how powerful, can expect India to bend. Sovereignty is India's legacy from its freedom fighters, its responsibility to its people, and its promise to its future generations. India's democratic strength has always been its most defining characteristic, the foundation on which its modern identity rests, and the shield with which it faces external criticism. When the world looks at India, it sees not just a country of 1.4 billion people, but the largest and most vibrant democracy in human history. This is not an exaggeration or a boast. It is a fact that has been proven time and again through peaceful transitions of power, massive electoral participation, and the survival of institutions despite enormous challenges. For any Western leader, including Donald Trump, to question or misunderstand India's democratic credentials is to ignore the scale and resilience of a system that has no parallel. Jaishankar's insistence on reminding the world of this truth is not about seeking approval. It is about reinforcing that India does not need lectures on democracy because it embodies democracy in its very existence. The strength of India's democracy lies first and foremost in its people. Over 600 million citizens cast their votes in national elections, often braving extreme weather, long distances, or personal hardships to ensure their voices are heard. This sheer scale is staggering. The entire population of many Western countries does not match the number of voters in a single Indian election. Yet, despite its size, the process is managed with precision and fairness. Independent institutions like the Election Commission of India conduct these elections with credibility, ensuring that every citizen's vote, whether from the remotest village or the largest city, carries the same weight. This inclusivity is at the core of India's democratic strength. Critics often highlight challenges such as political rivalries, regional tensions, or social divides, but these are not signs of weakness, they are signs of vitality. A democracy without disagreement is no democracy at all. India's parliament echoes with heated debates, its media scrutinizes those in power, and its civil society raises uncomfortable questions. These are the hallmarks of a living democracy. When the West points to polarization or dissent as evidence of decline, Jaishankar rightly counters that such features exist in every democracy, including the very nations that claim moral authority to judge others. The United States itself has faced deep polarization, contested elections, and violent protests. Yet it continues to call itself the world's oldest democracy. If democracy can survive and thrive there despite flaws, why should India's imperfections be treated differently? Another measure of democratic strength is the resilience of institutions. India's judiciary operates independently, often ruling against the government of the day when necessary. Its free press, despite pressures, continues to hold leaders accountable. Its federal structure allows states considerable autonomy, creating a balance of power that prevents over-centralization. The Constitution, written in 1950, remains the supreme guiding force, ensuring that the rule of law stands above individuals or political parties. Even during times of crisis such as the emergency of the 1970s, India's people and institutions eventually restored balance, proving that democracy here is not fragile but self-correcting. What shocks the West is not the existence of Indian democracy, but its durability. When India became independent in 1947, many Western observers predicted that it would not survive as a democracy. They argued that poverty, illiteracy, and diversity would make democratic governance impossible. Some suggested that India would eventually collapse into dictatorship or military rule, as many other post-colonial states did. Those predictions were wrong. 75 years later, India has not only preserved democracy but expanded it. Voter participation has increased, marginalized groups have risen to leadership positions, and coalition governments have proven that consensus building can work. Far from collapsing, democracy in India has deepened with time. The West often underestimates the symbolic power of Indian democracy. When the poorest farmer, the most marginalized woman, or the youngest first-time voter stands in line and casts a ballot, it sends a message to the world. Democracy is not a luxury reserved for the rich or educated. It is a universal right. In many ways, India has redefined democracy by proving that it can thrive in conditions once thought unsuitable. Western democracies often showcase stability in homogeneous societies, but India demonstrates resilience in diversity. That is a strength that no external critic can dismiss. India's democratic strength also lies in its ability to deliver. Critics sometimes claim that democracy slows decision-making or hampers reforms, yet India has implemented massive policies that impact hundreds of millions of people within democratic frameworks, welfare programs, digital inclusion through Aadhaar, large-scale poverty alleviation, and health initiatives like Ayushman Bharat have transformed lives while preserving democratic accountability. These achievements are not minor, they represent the ability of democracy to adapt and respond to citizens' needs in real time. Moreover, democracy in India is not just political, it is cultural. The ethos of debate, discussion, and diversity runs deep in its civilizational history. For thousands of years, India has thrived as a land where different religions, philosophies, and communities coexisted. The democratic impulse is embedded in this pluralism. It is why India can manage a society with more languages, faiths, and traditions than most continents, and still remain one united nation. When Jaishankar asserts India's democratic credentials, he is not reciting statistics, but drawing on this civilizational continuity, where dialogue has always been preferred over domination. For Western powers, what is unsettling is that India's democracy is entirely self-made. Unlike in many parts of the world where democracy was imported, imposed, or influenced by colonial powers, India's democratic journey is indigenous. The Constitution was written by Indians for Indians and has been defended by Indians. No external nation can claim ownership or guardianship of India's democratic values. This independence is why India reacts strongly when lectured about freedoms. As Jaishankar has often pointed out, nations with far shorter democratic histories should not presume to instruct the world's largest and most diverse democracy. At the international level, India's democratic strength gives it moral authority. When it speaks about human rights, inclusivity, or development, it does so not from theory but from practice. It knows what it means to lift millions out of poverty without sacrificing liberty. It knows what it means to face terrorism without compromising fundamental freedoms. It knows what it means to balance diversity without losing unity. This credibility sets India apart. India's democracy is not perfect. No democracy is, but its imperfections are managed within a system that allows correction, accountability, and renewal. That is the true measure of strength. Western critics often forget that democracy is not judged by whether problems exist, but by how those problems are confronted. India confronts them through ballots, courts, debates, and protests, not through suppression. That is why, despite difficulties, it endures. When Jaishankar speaks of India's democratic strength in reply to figures like Donald Trump, the message is clear. Democracy is not something India needs to be taught. It is something India teaches the world through example. The West may be surprised, unsettled, or even shocked by this confidence, but it cannot deny the reality. India's democracy is not just functioning, it is flourishing. And it will continue to flourish not because others approve, but because the Indian people have chosen it as their way of life. What unsettles the West is not the idea of an India struggling to find its place in the world, but the sight of an India rising, succeeding, and refusing to be controlled. For decades, there was a certain comfort in perceiving India as a developing nation forever dependent on aid, advice, and approval. That image served a narrative in which the West remained the driver of progress while the rest of the world played catch-up. Today, that narrative has been disrupted by India's rapid success, a transformation so undeniable that it shocks those who were accustomed to seeing it in a subordinate role. When Dr. Jaishankar speaks firmly about this success, he does not merely boast of growth rates or achievements. He highlights a shift in global power dynamics where India is no longer a passive participant, but an active shaper of the future. The most obvious marker of India's success is its economic rise. Once derided as a slow-moving economy trapped in bureaucracy, India is now one of the fastest-growing major economies in the world. Even in times of global recession, energy crises, or supply chain disruptions, India has managed to post growth figures that outpace many Western economies. This economic resilience is not accidental. It is the result of reforms, innovation, and the determination of a young and ambitious population. The digital revolution in India is perhaps the most striking example. Through initiatives like Digital India and the Aadhaar platform, the government has created a digital infrastructure that connects hundreds of millions of citizens, enabling everything from direct cash transfers to online education. In terms of digital payments, India has leapfrogged many Western countries, proving that progress is not the monopoly of the developed world. This kind of success unsettles those who still want to view India as dependent rather than independent. Beyond economics, India's achievements in science and technology have created a sense of shock in the West. For decades, space exploration was seen as the preserve of superpowers, yet India has landed missions on the moon, sent orbiters to Mars, and developed its own satellite navigation system, all at a fraction of the cost incurred by others. The Chandrayaan-3 mission, which placed a lander near the moon's south pole, was not just a scientific breakthrough, it was a statement of intent. It told the world that India is not merely following in the footsteps of others, it is charting new paths in areas once thought impossible for a developing nation. This success undermines old stereotypes, forcing the West to confront the reality that innovation is no longer confined to a few privileged nations. India's success is also social. The lifting of over 400 million people out of poverty in just 15 years is one of the most significant achievements in human history. This is not just a statistic, it is a transformation of lives, families, and generations. While many Western nations struggle with inequality or declining living standards, India has managed to combine economic growth with broad-based social improvement. Programs that provide free food grains, healthcare coverage, and housing support reach hundreds of millions, proving that development here is not elitist but inclusive. This shocks critics who often assume that democracy and development cannot coexist in poor nations. India's example shows that not only can they coexist, but they can reinforce each other. Another aspect of India's success that unsettles the West is its independent foreign policy. In a world that often expects smaller or emerging nations to align unquestioningly with one bloc or another, India has resisted. It has deepened its partnership with the United States and Europe while maintaining close ties with Russia. It engages with China where necessary, strengthens South-South cooperation, and builds bridges with Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. This ability to navigate multiple relationships without being trapped into dependency is a form of success the West did not anticipate. They are used to seeing nations fall neatly into spheres of influence. India, however, insists on engaging with everyone on equal terms, guided solely by its national interest. This shocks those who expect loyalty because India offers friendship but not servitude. India's success is cultural as well. For centuries, the West projected itself as the guardian of modernity while portraying non-Western cultures as backward or exotic. Today, Indian culture, from yoga to cinema to cuisine, is embraced globally. Bollywood films reach audiences across continents, Indian authors shape global literature, and Indian thinkers contribute to debates on philosophy, technology, and governance. The Indian diaspora, spread across the world, has become a source of pride and influence, occupying leadership roles in politics, business, and academia. This cultural success challenges the idea that soft power belongs only to the West. Instead, it demonstrates that India's civilizational heritage, combined with its modern creativity, can resonate with global audiences in ways that surprise those who once dismissed it. Even geopolitically, India's success is evident. Hosting the G20 presidency was more than a ceremonial role, it was a moment of leadership. India managed to bring together nations divided by war, economic disputes, and ideological differences, showcasing its ability to build consensus when others faltered. It positioned itself as the voice of the global South, highlighting the concerns of developing nations on issues like climate change, debt, and food security. This leadership role is unsettling for some in the West, because it shifts the global conversation away from their priorities and onto the needs of billions of people they often overlook. What shocks the West most of all is the confidence with which India now presents itself. Gone are the days when Indian leaders spoke with hesitation, seeking approval or validation from foreign capitals. Today, India's ministers, diplomats, and representatives speak with calm authority, challenging narratives and refusing to accept double standards. When questioned about human rights, they remind the world of Western failures, from colonialism to wars to systemic discrimination. When criticized for strategic choices, they point to Western hypocrisy in doing the same. This unapologetic confidence is a form of success that goes beyond numbers. It is psychological, signaling that India will no longer be patronized. India's success story also includes its people, particularly its youth. With one of the youngest populations in the world, India is a nation of energy, ambition, and ideas. Startups are thriving, unicorns are emerging, and entrepreneurs are innovating across sectors. While the West worries about aging populations and slowing growth, India sees opportunity in its demographics. This generational advantage, combined with digital literacy and global connectivity, positions India as a driver of the future, rather than a follower of the past. This too unsettles the West, which is unaccustomed to seeing such potential outside its own borders. Ultimately, what shocks the West about India's success is that it dismantles old hierarchies. For too long, the world was divided between those who led and those who followed. India refuses to play by that script. Its rise is not about mimicking the West, but about offering an alternative vision, one rooted in inclusivity, resilience, and sovereignty. This is why when JAISHANKAR speaks about India's success, his words resonate like a warning bell. The West cannot take India for granted anymore. It cannot dictate, it cannot dismiss, and it cannot dominate. India's success has created a reality in which it must be engaged as an equal, respected as a partner, and acknowledged as a leader. The emergence of a multipolar world order is one of the most profound shifts of the 21st century, and India stands at its center. For centuries, global politics was dominated by empires and later by the Westphalian order, where power was concentrated in a few capitals of Europe. After the Second World War, it transformed into a bipolar world defined by the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War narrative left little room for nations outside these two spheres to exercise true independence. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the world entered what many believed was a permanent unipolar phase, with the United States as the sole superpower. Western thinkers and leaders predicted the end of history, assuming that their economic models, cultural dominance, and political structures would remain unchallenged. But this assumption was deeply flawed. History did not end, it evolved. What we see today is a multipolar world where the balance of power is distributed, where diverse nations exert influence, and where no single bloc dictates the rules. India's rise has been central to this transformation, and it is this reality that unsettles those who once believed the West would remain unrivaled. Multipolarity is not a theoretical ideal, but a lived reality. It is visible in the way global decision-making has shifted. No longer can the West alone dictate terms on trade, climate change, or security. Countries across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East assert their voices, often refusing to align blindly with Western priorities. India exemplifies this shift by acting as a bridge between different blocs. It engages with the West on issues of technology, defense, and economics while maintaining deep relations with Russia and constructive dialogue with China. It builds partnerships with nations in the global South, from Africa to Southeast Asia, ensuring their concerns are not silenced in global forums. This refusal to fit neatly into one camp reflects the reality that power is now spread across multiple centers. The multipolar world is also evident in economic dynamics. The days when Western economies could alone drive global growth are over. Asia, led by countries like India and China, contributes significantly to global GDP. Supply chains, investment flows, and technological innovations are no longer monopolized by a handful of Western countries. India's thriving startup ecosystem, its leadership in digital payments, and its innovations in low-cost healthcare and technology have shown that solutions for global challenges can emerge from outside the West. By combining economic growth with inclusivity, India has presented itself not just as a participant, but as a model for development that others may emulate. Another dimension of multipolarity is geopolitical. Conflicts such as the war in Ukraine have revealed how divided global opinion has become. While Western nations framed the conflict in stark moral terms, much of the global South, including India, took a more nuanced stance. India condemned violence, but refused to isolate Russia completely, recognizing the complexity of its national interests. This independent approach frustrated Western capitals, which expected automatic alignment. But it also highlighted the reality of multipolarity. Nations no longer respond uniformly to the West's expectations. They weigh their own interests, calculate their own benefits, and chart their own response. This independence is not rebellion. It is the natural expression of a world where power is shared rather than concentrated. Multipolarity also manifests in institutions. Traditional Western-dominated platforms like the G7 or NATO no longer represent the aspirations of the broader world. Instead, organizations such as BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and even the G20 are gaining prominence. India plays a leading role in these forums, ensuring that the voices of emerging economies and developing nations are heard. During its G20 presidency, India positioned itself as the voice of the global South, pushing issues like debt relief, climate financing, and food security into the global conversation. This was not just symbolism, it was proof that leadership in today's world is distributed, and India is among those shaping it. For the West, what is shocking is the speed of this transition. In just 3 decades, the unipolar dominance of the United States has given way to a world where Washington, Beijing, Moscow, Brussels, and Delhi all exert influence. Western powers are unused to being challenged, and they often interpret multipolarity as instability. But from India's perspective, multipolarity is balance. It prevents any one power from imposing its will globally. It ensures that international relations are defined not by domination but by negotiation. For India, this is not just a strategic stance, but a philosophical one, rooted in its civilizational belief in diversity and balance. India's approach to multipolarity is particularly unique because it is inclusive. Unlike some rising powers that seek dominance, India's vision of multipolarity emphasizes cooperation. It does not aim to replace one hegemon with another, but to create a system where different nations can coexist, contribute, and thrive. This is why India speaks of being a leading power rather than a great power. A leading power leads by example, by consensus, and by partnership. This is fundamentally different from the coercive models of the past, and it resonates strongly with countries of the global south that have long sought greater agency. One cannot ignore the psychological impact of multipolarity on Western nations. For decades, the assumption was that global standards, whether in economics, politics, or culture, would always flow from the West to the rest. Today, that flow is multidirectional. Technologies developed in India are adopted globally. Cultural exports like yoga, Ayurveda, and Bollywood films shape lifestyles across continents. Indian companies invest abroad, Indian thinkers influence debates, and Indian workers power global industries. This reversal of roles is not just economic, it is symbolic of a world where influence is no longer one-sided. India's foreign policy underlines this shift through the doctrine of strategic autonomy. It reflects the belief that in a multipolar world, no country should mortgage its sovereignty to another. By maintaining partnerships across divides, India has proven that it is possible to be friendly with the United States while still engaging with Russia, or to strengthen ties with Europe while deepening outreach to Africa. This flexibility is not opportunism, it is the logic of multipolarity, where no single partnership can define a nation's global identity. In this context, Dr. JAISHANKAR'S words strike with particular weight when he tells the West that India will not be pressured into abandoning its ties with Russia, or when he points out Western hypocrisy in energy purchases. He is not just defending India's interests. He is articulating the philosophy of multipolarity itself, that no single power has the right to dictate global behavior. This clarity is what unsettles the West. It is not the idea of India acting independently that shocks them. It is the recognition that India's independence is part of a larger trend where the entire world is moving beyond Western dominance. The multipolar world is still evolving, and it will be contested. But the trajectory is clear. Power is distributed. Influence is shared. Leadership is diversified. India's role in this order is not peripheral, it is central. And that centrality comes from its ability to balance values with interests, partnerships with sovereignty, and ambition with responsibility. For the West, this is a new reality to adapt to. For India, it is the fulfillment of its destiny as a civilization state reasserting itself on the global stage. When India asserts that it will not succumb to external pressure, it is not merely making a diplomatic point, but delivering a statement of national character. For far too long, powerful nations, especially in the West, have operated under the assumption that their words, sanctions, or criticisms can bend countries into submission. India, however, has consistently demonstrated that while it values dialogue and partnerships, it will not allow itself to be coerced. This firm stance against external pressure is not new. It is rooted in history, forged through struggles for independence, and reinforced by decades of navigating global politics on its own terms. When Dr. Shankar speaks about this principle, his calm yet unshakable tone conveys a simple but chilling truth. India listens, but it does not obey when its sovereignty is at stake. One of the clearest examples of India's resistance to pressure lies in its approach to energy security. When the war in Ukraine disrupted global energy markets, The United States and Europe urged countries to stop purchasing Russian oil. Many expected India to follow suit, either out of loyalty to Western partners or fear of political backlash. But India chose differently. It recognized that its primary responsibility was to ensure affordable energy for its 1.4 billion people, not to align with Western strategy. By continuing to buy discounted Russian oil, India stabilized domestic fuel prices and kept inflation in check. When questioned, Jaishankar pointedly reminded Western critics that Europe itself was buying far more energy from Russia before the war and even during its early stages. His sharp reply, "If I am buying oil for my people at a good price, that's my moral duty," cut through the hypocrisy and reaffirmed India's unwillingness to sacrifice national interest for external approval. This moment epitomized India's refusal to bow to pressure. This principle extends beyond energy. In defense procurement, India has consistently diversified its sources, purchasing from the United States, Russia, France, Israel, and increasingly developing its own indigenous systems. Western nations often attempt to influence these choices, sometimes threatening sanctions for deals with non-Western suppliers. Yet India has made it clear that its defense requirements are too critical to be dictated from outside. The acquisition of the Russian S-400 missile system, despite threats of American sanctions under CA-TISA, is a striking example. India refused to cancel the deal, emphasizing that national security is non-negotiable. To give in would have meant compromising sovereignty, and India has never been willing to pay that price. India's firm stance against pressure is also evident in the realm of diplomacy. When asked to condemn or isolate certain countries in line with Western agendas, India instead prefers a balanced approach that prioritizes dialogue. This is not neutrality born of indecision, but independence born of principle. For example, while maintaining strong ties with the United States, India continues to engage Russia and Iran. It has also strengthened its role in groupings like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, despite Western unease. By doing so, India signals that it will not be boxed into a single camp. It will engage with everyone on its own terms, not on terms dictated by others. In matters of internal governance, too, India pushes back against external pressure. Western governments and organizations frequently issue reports on human rights, religious freedom, or democracy, often couched in critical language. India does not dismiss such reports lightly, but neither does it allow them to define its self-image. Jaishankar has often remarked that democracy does not need certification from those whose own records are flawed. India is the world's largest democracy, and its legitimacy comes from the trust of its voters, not from external think tanks or foreign governments. By rejecting these external judgments, India underscores a fundamental truth. No nation, however powerful, has the right to act as a moral custodian for others. Part of India's ability to resist pressure lies in its economic and strategic rise. In earlier decades, when India was economically dependent on aid or loans, it had less room to maneuver. Today, with a growing economy, increasing global investments, and stronger military capabilities, it has greater confidence in charting an independent path. The rapid expansion of its digital economy, the rise of unicorn startups, and its growing role in global trade negotiations mean that India is no longer a country that can be threatened with isolation. On the contrary, many nations seek partnership with India because of its market size, technological innovation, and geopolitical significance. This shift in leverage allows India to push back against pressure without fear of being marginalized. The tone in which India resists external pressure is equally important. It is not loud or emotional, but calm, logical, and precise. This unnerves those who expect defensiveness. When Jaishankar is asked why India continues to engage with Russia, his response is not confrontational but factual. We have to do what is best for our people. Others do the same. This composure sends a strong message that India's decisions are deliberate, reasoned, and unapologetic. There is no room for guilt or hesitation. The firmness lies not in volume but in clarity. This is what makes such statements chilling for Western audiences accustomed to compliance. India's rejection of pressure is also philosophical. At its core, it reflects a worldview shaped by civilizational values. For thousands of years, Indian philosophy has emphasized autonomy, self-reliance, and balance. The concept of Swaraj, popularized during the independence movement, was not just about political freedom, but about the ability of a community to govern itself without external domination. Today, Swaraj manifests in India's approach to global politics. It does not seek confrontation, but it refuses subordination. It does not reject engagement, but it demands equality. This moral foundation strengthens India's resolve to stand firm against external attempts to dictate its choices. One must also recognize that India's resistance to pressure inspires others. Countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia often look at India as an example of how to assert sovereignty without becoming isolated. When India defies pressure from powerful Western nations, it sends a message that smaller or emerging nations too can chart independent courses. This leadership role enhances India's credibility as the voice of the global South, a partner that understands what it means to be pressured but has found ways to resist. At times, Western nations interpret India's stance as obstinacy or opportunism, but the truth is more nuanced. India is willing to cooperate, compromise, and negotiate, but only when it aligns with mutual respect. What it rejects is coercion, double standards, and selective morality. For instance, Western powers that invaded countries without UN approval or that continue to exploit global financial systems for their benefit cannot reasonably lecture others about rules-based orders. By pointing out these inconsistencies, India exposes the fragility of Western moral authority and strengthens its own claim to independent decision-making. In the end, India's refusal to bow to external pressure is not about arrogance, it is about dignity. A nation of 1.4 billion people cannot and should not live according to the dictates of others. Its choices must be its own, shaped by its needs, aspirations, and values. When Jaishankar articulates this principle on global platforms, it resonates not just as a policy stance, but as a declaration of identity. India is polite, but it is not pliant. It is cooperative, but not compliant. And it is open to dialogue, but never at the cost of sovereignty. India today speaks with a voice of confidence that is not manufactured overnight, but cultivated through decades of progress, sacrifice, and resilience. When one speaks of India as a confident global leader, it is not a hollow slogan, it is a reflection of a lived reality. For centuries, India was perceived as a land of potential, but also as a land of limitations, exploited under colonialism and often underestimated in the early years of independence. The world once looked at India as a country weighed down by poverty, bureaucracy, and internal challenges. Yet now, when India steps onto the global stage, it does so with the quiet power of a nation that knows it belongs at the center of international decision-making. Jaishankar's words remind the West that India is no longer an emerging player waiting for validation. It is a decisive actor shaping the future of the international order. This confidence comes first from India's economic transformation. With one of the fastest-growing large economies, India has shifted from being aid-dependent to being a provider of aid and investment for others. Its GDP growth consistently outpaces many developed nations, and its market of 1.4 billion people gives it undeniable leverage. Nations that once patronized India now seek access to its opportunities, whether in technology, pharmaceuticals, renewable energy, or digital infrastructure. The Make in India and Digital India initiatives symbolize this change. No longer is India simply a back office for the world. It is becoming a hub of innovation and manufacturing. This economic rise translates into political strength because countries respect those who bring value to the table. When India negotiates trade deals, participates in global economic forums, or shapes supply chain networks, it does so as a country that cannot be ignored. A second source of confidence lies in India's technological and scientific achievements. The successful Chandrayaan-3 mission, placing a lander on the moon's south pole, stunned the world. For a country that was once dismissed as lacking capacity, to achieve such milestones at a fraction of the cost spent by wealthier nations is nothing short of revolutionary. India is also a leader in vaccine production, not only supplying its own population during the pandemic, but also sending vaccines abroad under its Vaccine Maitri initiative. This demonstrated that India's rise is not selfish, it is inclusive, and its leadership benefits others. These achievements signal to the West that India is not dependent on handouts or imported solutions, it is capable of solving problems at a global scale. India's military modernization further reinforces its global leadership. With one of the largest armed forces in the world and nuclear capabilities, India has ensured that it is not vulnerable to external intimidation. The consistent strengthening of its navy underscores its role in ensuring stability in the Indo-Pacific, a region that has become the center of global trade and security debates. India's participation in the Quad, alongside the United States, Japan, and Australia, reflects its growing weight in regional security. But equally important is its independent capacity to act. India is not a junior partner, it is an indispensable pillar in regional balance. By cultivating both partnerships and self-reliance in defense, India proves that its leadership is not contingent on others but grounded in its own strength. Yet, what truly sets India apart is that its global leadership is anchored in values rather than aggression. Unlike many Western powers whose dominance was built on colonization, exploitation, and military interventions, India's leadership is rooted in cooperation and respect. Jaishankar often emphasizes that India does not believe in imposing its model on others. Instead, it offers partnership, whether through developmental projects in Africa, infrastructure initiatives in Asia, or humanitarian aid in times of crisis. This approach resonates deeply with countries in the global South, many of which have long grown tired of lectures and conditional assistance from the West. By offering dignity in diplomacy, India attracts trust, and trust is the true currency of global leadership. India's confidence also emerges from its demographic strength. With the largest youth population in the world, India is positioned not just as a market but as a source of innovation, creativity, and labor. This demographic dividend means that India will remain a dynamic force in the global economy for decades, unlike many Western countries facing aging populations. The Indian diaspora too contributes to this confidence, excelling in fields like technology, medicine, academia, and politics across the world. Leaders of major global corporations often come from Indian backgrounds, symbolizing how India's influence extends beyond borders. This global presence amplifies India's soft power and reinforces its image as a country that is not only rising but already embedded in the world's leadership fabric. Culturally, India's confidence is strengthened by its civilizational depth, a country that has given the world philosophies, religions, literature, and arts for millennia cannot be dismissed as a newcomer. Yoga, Ayurveda, classical music, and Bollywood are not just cultural exports, but symbols of a living civilization that continues to inspire globally. When India projects itself as Vishwaguru, a teacher to the world, it does so not with arrogance, but with the knowledge that its heritage carries timeless wisdom relevant to today's crises. Climate change, for example, is a domain where India's ancient ethos of harmony with nature intersects with modern leadership in renewable energy, making it a credible voice in global climate negotiations. Diplomatically, India's role as a confident leader is seen in its ability to balance multiple relationships without being trapped in dependency. It maintains strong ties with the United States while also nurturing relations with Russia, engages with Europe while championing the global South, and participates in both Western-led and non-Western forums. This ability to walk multiple paths without losing independence is a hallmark of leadership. It shows the world that India does not have to choose sides because it has the stature to define its own path. In forums like the G20, where India's presidency highlighted the needs of developing nations, this balance was on full display. The successful inclusion of the African Union as a permanent member of the G20 during India's presidency symbolized India's role as a bridge builder, something the world desperately needs. Critically, India's confidence challenges the West's monopoly over defining narratives. For too long, Western nations have dictated what constitutes democracy, human rights, or development. India, however, demonstrates that democracy can thrive outside Western molds. Its elections, with participation from hundreds of millions of people across diverse languages, religions, and regions, put to shame many developed countries with lower voter turnout. When criticized by Western organizations, India pushes back firmly, asserting that its democratic legitimacy comes from its people, not from external certification. This self-assured defense unsettles critics who are unused to being challenged by nations they once considered subordinate. The psychological shift is perhaps the most chilling for the West. It is no longer dealing with an India that seeks validation, but with an India that sets terms of engagement. This transformation forces a recalibration of global politics. Nations that once saw India as a market or ally of convenience must now recognize it as a partner with its own vision and conditions. India's confidence ensures that agreements, partnerships, and dialogues happen on equal footing. This equality is precisely what disturbs those who are accustomed to hierarchy in international relations. At its core, India's emergence as a confident global leader is a story of self-belief. It does not claim perfection, nor does it deny its challenges, but it refuses to be defined by those challenges. It is a nation that can acknowledge poverty, yet boast of space missions, a nation that grapples with diversity, yet celebrates it as strength, a nation that remembers its colonial scars, yet builds friendships even with former colonizers. This ability to embrace contradictions without losing clarity is the essence of confidence. It is what allows India to step forward not timidly, but assuredly into the global arena. Thus, when Jaishankar speaks with composure, pointing out double standards or calmly asserting India's choices, it is not merely rhetoric. It is the voice of a nation that has earned its place at the table. The West may find this unsettling because it shifts the balance of power, but for the rest of the world, it is refreshing to see a leader who speaks not out of dominance, but out of conviction. India's confidence as a global leader is therefore not only about power, it is about example. It proves that a nation can rise without losing its soul, and that perhaps is the most chilling message of all to those who built their empires on domination rather than dignity. And so, let it be clear to every capital across the world, India's rise is not a matter of chance, nor is it a gift bestowed by others. It is the outcome of the determination of its people, the strength of its democracy, and the vision of a nation that has endured and prevailed against every test of history. Those who once sought to lecture India now find themselves listening. Those who once expected compliance now encounter conviction. India does not seek confrontation, but neither will it accept subordination. We will engage, we will cooperate, and we will build partnerships, but always as equals, never as followers. This is not simply India's message to one leader or one nation. It is India's message to the world. The era of a unipolar order is fading, and in its place stands a new reality, a multipolar world, where voices long ignored now carry weight. India is not just participating in this transformation, it is driving it. We speak not only for ourselves, but also for the aspirations of billions across the global South who yearn for dignity, fairness, and respect. So let the West be shocked if it must. Let critics be unsettled if they will. India's journey is irreversible, its confidence unshakable, and its place at the global table undeniable. We are not the India of hesitation, but the India of assertion. We are not waiting to be invited into history, we are writing it. And to those who wonder what India's role in this century will be, the answer is simple. India will stand tall, it will speak firmly, and it will lead with the quiet strength of a civilization that has always known that true power lies not in dominance, but in resilience, wisdom, and courage.